The ice cream van. He stood in front of the open Sub-Zero. Mustard, some salad greens, an expired carton of rice milk, cheese, neatly contained and stacked leftovers of grilled fish, sautéed vegetables, rice. The cold washed over his face and began creeping down the rest of him. He could smell an old escaped onion in there somewhere in the back of the crisper, no doubt. John shut the refrigerator door. The kitchen felt empty. All chrome and glass with a temperature-controlled wine room off the pantry. He shook his head slightly, sank to the slate floor. She was never coming back. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-dum. The tinkling, slightly out-of-phase sound of chimes came through the open window. Ice cream. Bad ice cream. Cheap ice cream. Ice cream sandwiched between two long, softening chocolate wafer cookies. Ice cream in a cone covered in hard chocolate and nuts. Ice cream on a stick. Fudgesicles. John was quickly on his sneakered feet, patting the pockets of his tracksuit for change. There was money on the entry table. He'd left it there 3 days ago after Carol broke up with him at Les Lunes, and he'd crawled home and sobbed himself to sleep on their king-size bed with its 700-count navy sheets and pillow-top mattress. She had already rented a fucking condo across town. Would send movers for the things she wanted in a week or two. The condo was a different look, you know, so the things from the house wouldn't really fit overall. She had left the house that morning without mentioning a word. "You must be joking!" He had shoved his glass of wine across the starched tablecloth, coming perilously close to knocking into the candles. Carol's manicured hand steadied the squat glass tumbler filled with glass beads and black tea light. Her fingernails were always these weird, perfect ovals with white tips. They matched her sleek mahogany hair and sharply tilted eyebrows. "You've been considering this for what? A month? 3 months? A year?" She just sipped her Malbec and looked at him with those green eyes. Tinted contact lenses. "We've been drifting, John. You know that. You haven't been yourself in quite some time." No, he hadn't been her in quite some time. He didn't match her nails and eyebrows and perfect hair. He had loved her, still loved her. He'd tried and clearly failed. John carefully pushed back his chair and rose, kissed her pale, powdery cheek, then threaded through the other tables and out the door, leaving it to her to pay the check. The chimes grew louder. The truck was almost in front of the house. He jogged toward the cherrywood console and the brass dish set under the Chinese vase with its now drooping bouquet. Under the keys and change, he saw a $5 bill. He pocketed it all and ran out the door. The ice cream van was chugging up the little rise. Bright blue and yellow it rolled, incongruous, past the green sweeps of grass, the curving driveways, and the Tudor facades. How had it even gotten through the gate? Past the guard shack? Then John noticed there were strange paintings on the side panels. Hedgehogs dancing. Otters drinking tea. A bear reading a gilded book. The van began to slow, stopping in front of the walkway at 836 Jasmine Drive. The jasmine actually still sweetened the air, despite attempts to tame the unruly vines by the Homeowners Association. Fascists. John stepped carefully toward the van, some of his excitement ebbing as the strange reality before him registered. The side window rolled up with a snap. Down plopped a hinged yellow counter, and behind the counter was the most amazing sight of all. A man? A man. Attenuated, spindly, spidery, thin, with a tall top hat and a faded black frock coat. Out of his breast pocket peeked a red and white striped puff of silk. He didn't look like an ice cream vendor. He looked interested and interesting. "Come forward, my friend. I have treats in store. I have lavender ices and chocolate drops. I have licorice black as a raven's mouth and ice cream as smooth as a selkie's thighs." John's heart was beating funny, and he had a weird taste in his mouth, like that one time Carol had made him try chartreuse at that fancy French Quarter restaurant when he'd flown down to join her on some business trip. Strangely spicy and sugary at the same time. His eyes played tricks, too. It seemed like there were things creeping up on him, but when he turned his head, all he saw was concrete and tarmac, Tudor homes and green. "I don't know what that means. I just wanted some ice cream. You got ice cream sandwiches? Vanilla?" The man behind the counter looked disappointed. His sharp mouth turned down a bit, then turned upward again. "I think I know what you'll like. Rose petal ice cream delicately placed between cacao shortbread." He bent, head obscured by the wall of the van. John stared at an otter. It stared back. He could hear rummaging and muttering. The man finally rose again, proffering, that was really the only word for it, a bar wrapped in bronze waxed paper. Fumbling in his pocket, John pulled out the 5. The man waved his slender fingers in the air. "No, no payment required. This is our gift to you." He placed the cool bar in John's hand, withdrew his arm, flipped up the counter, and slammed down the window. "Toodaloo!" he called out from the front seat. The van started rolling. The chimes began again. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-dum. John shrugged, then peeled back a corner of the bronze paper. The cookie inside was thicker than the usual chocolate wafers. He sniffed at the bar. Sure enough, rose. The ice cream was pale-colored, like vanilla, but with the smallest hint of pink. He peeled back more paper, ripping it as it went. Bit in. The cookie resisted for a moment. Then the cold hit his teeth. And a wash of butter, chocolate, fine ground wheat, and smooth, smooth ice cream tinged with rose fell through his mouth. John could barely chew. It was as if his body, as if time itself, had slowed. He almost stopped breathing. He licked at a droplet of the rosy cream before it fell onto his hand, then bit through the buttery chocolate and into the ice cream again. He closed his eyes and chewed, swallowed, breathed in the scent of jasmine and sun-touched grass. "Selkie's thighs," he whispered. "Selkie's thighs." They all hungered for something. Love, acceptance, recognition. Oh, sure, sometimes they hungered for fame or money, someone to control, or some eye candy that would prove their self-worth. But all of those really boiled down to the first 3. Henri piloted the ice cream van past tan and brown houses, past white houses, green lawns, gardens with carefully tended roses, red and yellow, gardens with low creeping phlox in blues and pinks, the occasional maple. It was almost beautiful, and made him long for home. Home of the endless space between dawn and twilight. Home of the rushing waterfalls and deep green moss. The world here felt so flat sometimes. The food was like chewing on tree bark. The music? like chimes on this van, tinny, non-melodious. But they were comforting to them somehow, those chimes, to those who could hear them at all. The ones who heard the chimes were filled with greater need than most. They were hungry for some magic. The next day, John took a shower for the first time in days. He pulled on dark jeans and a t-shirt and padded barefoot to the closet. There, tucked in the back, was a long-sleeved purple shirt with a sharp-pointed collar that he'd bought 4 years ago and worn once. He'd started out that evening feeling good. The purple set off his blue eyes in the mirror. Carol hadn't said a word, just paused and gave him the silent up and down. The party was a disaster. Their friend Tim had sidled over with a beer, tilted it at John's shoulder. "Feeling happy today, John?" He started laughing, smacked him on the back. "Hey, Jerry, don't you think John's looking happy?" Assholes. The shirt felt good as he pulled it on. Smooth cotton, crisp. It tucked in flat and narrow around his body. He turned sideways and forward in the mirror, checking all the angles. Yeah, purple. That ice cream was fantastic. John definitely would keep his ears open for the chimes. Not that he'd be staying in this neighborhood. That ice cream was fantastic. John definitely would keep his ears open for the chimes. Not that he'd be staying in this neighborhood for long. Funny, too, that he'd never seen the truck before, not in all the years they'd lived here. He'd never tasted anything like that ice cream sandwich, either. Carol didn't allow ice cream in the house, but he sometimes hit the gelato shop when he was running errands in the city. The gelato was good, creamy, flavored with cardamom or raspberry, but nothing tasted like that rose or those cookies. Silky's thighs. Wonder what the hell he meant by that. John had woken with the memory of the ocean, salt spray on his lips, the feel of wind on his face. He'd been dreaming of the sand, dreaming of the ways the white foam tickled the shore into soft dampness, dreaming of the blue-green of the waves. He'd heard singing, some melody he couldn't place, a song he knew but hadn't heard before. He had awakened with tears on his face, but no real sadness. The feeling was more like longing, something he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He remembered reading books at night, curled under the coverlet, glow-in-the-dark stars winking from the ceiling. Sometimes he would put the book down, stare at those stars, and just be filled with so much feeling. He was never sure exactly what the feeling was, only that he wanted something. It wasn't that he wanted to get on a rocket ship to the stars. It wasn't that he wanted to fight a dragon or quest for a missing goblet. He didn't want the freaky carnival to come to town, though that sounded pretty cool. He just wanted something. He wanted something to happen. Nothing ever did. For the first time, he felt like it just might. And if it didn't, perhaps he could do something about that. Yeah, today might just end up being a good day. The ice cream van had seemed a lark. Henri had grown weary of the beauty all the time, the sameness and perfection. Here he got to see different things. He got to travel down alleyways strewn with discarded needles, oil a gorgeous sheen upon the street. He had traveled into towns tucked high into dry mountains, smelling of balsam and loam, had driven past bodegas and delicatessens, pulled up in front of strip joints and movie theaters. He'd driven from ocean to ocean, to tattered boardwalks and pristine sands. He'd given out kite-shaped popsicles in East Oakland and white chocolate bonbons in Boulder. He'd driven through Detroit and Pittsburgh, Chattanooga and Crown Heights, pulled up at a rodeo outside Bastrop and the Symphony at Rockefeller Center. Every single person he'd encountered, adult or child, prostitute or banker, football star or chemist, admin or mechanic, they'd all heard the chimes when no one else around them had. They all stepped forward to the yellow counter and asked for what they thought they wanted. It was never what Henri had, but he always had just the thing. Not quite what they expected. Surprising, delicate, delicious. Surprise, yes. Sometimes he stayed just long enough to watch them shimmer with it as they sniffed and chewed and swallowed. Their faces would freeze for a moment, then soften and relax. A shimmering light crept up into their eyes. He never stayed past that point, though. Never stayed long enough for them to ask him questions. That wasn't his job, answering things. His job was to have just that little thing behind the counter. A taste of sweetness, a hint of darkness, the flavor of mystery, with the promise of some light. With all of that, they could learn to feed the hunger on their own. Once the magic was inside them, one less cardboard-tasting dinner, one more tuneful song that caused loins to stir and hearts to wonder, one more book, one more painting, one more dance, one more building that called people to look and not pass by, one connection, then another. It would take some time, but Henri had that. And he had an ice cream van.